Blessings in Jesus' name. So, in our day and age, we're seeing our governments overstepping what is equality and what is diversity. If you have a right, that right can never be diminished. The right can never be diminished. If it has been such in ages past, it must be able to be retained as that, or the right has been removed. Creating a facade that you can have that right reduced is therefore abandoning that right. If I ever had the right to preach the gospel, then anybody claiming that they can reduce the words I can use or the scriptural verses I can use by way of another person's right is therefore reducing everybody's right. See, everybody, whether they're a believer or a non-believer, has the right to become a believer and therefore carry out everything that becoming a believer in Christ affords. Or, as the Irish Constitution says, obliges the Irish person. The Irish person takes on an obligation to Jesus Christ as a result of becoming a believer. We, the people of Eire, humbly acknowledging all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ. But what are all our obligations? And can a court of law or a commission reduce what Christianity is in the eyes of Christianity? Therefore, if I have a right to practice as a Christian, nobody can tell me that somebody else's identical right removes my right to express myself as a Christian. Therefore, it wouldn't be an identical right, but you'd now be endowing another worldview over Christianity. And that's against the Constitution. You're not allowed to endow one right over another right. For example, if you have the right to claim you're interested in the same sex, you have the right also to claim that you don't have any interest in the same sex. Correct? So, if I'm allowed to say that I don't agree with Christian worldview on sexuality, then the Christian is also allowed to say, I don't agree with your worldview on sexuality. Because rights are a two-way street. One who has one worldview cannot reduce the rights of another who has another worldview unless they offend the existing laws. For example, a paedophile might say that his right has been reduced to express himself by way of another's right not to be raped. But the one person's right not to be raped can't be reduced by the paedophile's ungodly urges. It would be preposterous. So if I have a right to exclaim Christian worldviews and precepts, do you have a right to exclaim yours? And if you have a right to exclaim your worldview, is mine reduced by yours? You see, neither the Christian worldview can reduce your right to disagree with it, as much as your worldview can't reduce the Christian's right to profess Christianity. Otherwise, your diversity is disingenuous. Your appeal to diversity is disingenuous. What you're saying is, I want to pretend that a diversity exists so that I can exalt my worldview over yours and prevent you from fully expressing your worldview. That's not true diversity. If you're claiming that you want diversity in terms of free will and choosing what you believe in or express in society, given that we must assume that it's not obscene, because things of an obscene nature, salacious or lewd nature, cannot be publicly professed or exhibited by any means of communication. Of course, they railroaded that when they brought strip club banners and things like that out on the streets. Nobody policed that then. But if you put a scripture on a banner that offends somebody of his particular community in their opinion, then suddenly you've broken a law before the courts. You see the hypocrisy? They're not tolerant of all worldviews. That's a facade. That's a fallacy. What they're tolerant of is their narrative. They're tolerant of their rhetoric. They're tolerant of their agenda, and not tolerant of anything that is opposed to it. Now they might, just to say that's untrue, produce a Christian fake and say, well, we don't have any problem with them because they're not coming out and doing. Oh, but then they're not Christian, because they're not actually doing what either the preamble of the Irish Constitution enshrines or what the Bible commands Christians to do, and that is preach the gospel and expose sin. Isn't that why they crucified Jesus? Because he came and told them their deeds were evil. See, it doesn't matter who you are, who you claim to represent. The problem is that if you have a right, that right is not limited to a demographic. So what they're saying is, you have a right to be a Christian. You have a right even to preach the gospel. But stay away from these subjects that might cause a bit of disagreement in society. Well, then you're trying to reduce the Christian's right to express Christianity. So now you're exalting your worldview above the Christian worldview in practice, because you're allowing, for example, LGBTQ parades, pride parades, but you're now trying to limit the remit and broadcast capabilities of the Christian preaching the gospel and professing his faith. And actually, as the Irish Constitution says, acknowledging, carrying out all his obligations to the divine Lord Jesus Christ, the righteous. So, for example, if I have the right to be a Christian, somebody else's ignorance of what it is to be a Christian cannot reduce my right to be a Christian. Do you understand that? If somebody else is expressing their worldview, Christians don't intervene in that. We don't intercept that. We don't try to prevent that. We'll expose it if it is ungodly. That's also our right to do that. So, I mean, years ago it used to be unlawful to get married to the same gender. You would go to jail. So how long before they start trying to make paedophilia socially acceptable? So where do we draw the line? Do you understand? You say, well, paedophiles are different because they offend the rights of somebody. Are they? Only today, in your view. But because something has come before a referendum, does that mean we can no longer talk about it or disagree with it? Absolutely not, because that wouldn't be democracy. That's preposterous. If you're saying that somebody bringing something for referendum and it being granted is now a disqualification from ever entering into open discussion on that matter, you're now against democracy. You're a hypocrite. Because the very democracy you used to bring about your agenda, you're now slamming because it doesn't agree with it. Where is true tolerance of diversity in worldview? Where's this tolerance? Where's this diversity? What you're seeing is hypocrisy. You're not seeing tolerance of different worldviews. As a Christian, we don't agree in same-sex relationships. I mean, everybody and their dog over a certain age knows that, so to speak. People know that. That's an age-old Catholic taught precept. So do they want to claim now that they can change Catholicism to suit the narrative on Netflix? Hey, what's Netflix saying? Well, if we want to ingratiate ourselves back into the society, we must agree with Netflix because of all the damage we did to our reputation when we raped children. when we produce pedophiles in our ranks. Now we have to try to accept all of those ungodly things to some extent and degree, so that we can re-ingratiate ourselves into people's homes and into society and get people's bums back on the pews, putting money in the basket. Because these Volkswagen Golfs aren't free. And these holidays to Thailand. Where nobody knows your name. See the point? There's a degree of corruption there. The point is this. If I have diversity last year, enough to make a public declaration that I don't agree with abortion, to make a public declaration that I don't agree with same-sex marriage, to make a public declaration that I don't agree with paedophilia, to make a public declaration that I don't agree with bestiality, to make a public declaration that I don't agree with obscenity, to make a public declaration that I don't agree with anything that's harmful. If I have a right to do that last year, you can't claim I still have the same diversity as you and the same rights as you if you're now saying your difference of opinion now reduces my right to express mine. You have a right to express your opinion so long as the mode by which you're doing so is not obscene. And so in law we have a very specific definition of what is obscenity. Obscenity is anything of a lewd, salacious or pornographic nature. Anything of a deliberately, overtly descriptive nature that is unnecessary. But if it's a necessary description to make the point, then it's not ungodly. And people will often put their children up as a defense against their worldview. They'll say, I don't want my child to be exposed to what you're saying. Well, you can stay in your house and only give them what Netflix is saying if you want. But if they engage in society, they're going to be exposed to different worldviews. And that's the nature of having a democracy and a freedom of expression. Because if they walk around the streets, Mommy and Daddy can't insulate them and give them this insular, limited upbringing that doesn't allow them to see different perspectives and points of view. Do you see the point? So are you a hypocrite? Do you think that because now there's more diversity in how people go about publicly expressing their worldview, that suddenly that reduces any worldview that would disagree with that? It's preposterous. It's like we accept everything except the fact that you don't accept what we accept. Well, then you don't accept everything. You accept what is harmful and won't allow anybody expose what you're doing as harmful because it works against you. You see the point? The point I'm making is this. If you have a different opinion to somebody else, you have a right to express that, so long as it's not obscene. And again, obscenity has a very specific description. The word offensive only applies to an offence in terms of breaking the law. Offensive is a ridiculous term that shouldn't appear anywhere but as a descriptive of obscenity and the inciting of violence. There is no other context for it in law. There's no extant definition of offensive grounded in law. So it's ridiculous, it's too ambiguous, it's too open to subjectivity, and it shouldn't be used in any legislature because it's too vague. Anybody can be offended by anything. What you can't do is say that because you're offended by what I'm saying, now suddenly it's unlawful because I'm offended. You could be offended by anything. It would be ridiculous and preposterous to purport that because somebody's offended by what you say, because they have a different worldview, that in some way now you're impeding or imposing upon their rights by way of expressing your difference in opinion. That would be nonsense. See, God has given you grace and He's given you the ability to make your decision. He's given you a free will, and he's given you time to make your decision, laying out life and death in front of you in this world. And so how are you going to make that decision openly if you're only allowed to hear one side of the story or one specific worldview? So this is against the cross of Christ. It's against diversity. It's against grace. It's against everything that God has given you. It's not for you in any way. Because even a person who's now claiming to be homosexual can later on in life have a family and be heterosexual. What judge in the land can say that they must remain that way? And therefore, how can they physiologically, biologically, or logically make the claim that that's the final nature of the person? Even if it's just the current nature of the person, they can't actually say that with any certainty, because if it was changed, it wasn't the current nature of the person. Because the true nature of the person will always out. It will always come to the surface. So the judge can't, in advance of that occurring, make a definitive or final judgment over you, saying that you're this way or you're that. If you then therefore have a right to change your mind on that, who's the judge to tell you that you can't change your mind on that? Or that somebody who's bringing you a different worldview than the one you now practice is in some way breaking the law because that's not your current worldview and you're offended by it. But you have to have the right to hear a different worldview and change your mind. So, because you have a right to conscience, that means you have a right to change your mind. Because you have a right to change your mind, you have a right to hear differing worldviews. When somebody tries to step in front of that and say, no, stop giving them different worldviews, what they're actually doing is trying to lead you into a specific worldview and reduce your rights by way of preventing other worldviews from being expressed in your presence. And then they can lead you to say, be offended with us because... And the mob comes along and it starts to persecute you if you don't join it, and take up a torch and a pitchfork and join them on their stomp and on their parade and on their march. Then they persecute you. But if you're the friend of the mob, you get this perk and that. But if you're against the mob, well, we don't want you around here anymore. And most people will cave under that sort of pressure, because they don't want to have a stigmatization attached to them by way of association with those who would go against what the mob is saying. So now we have section 115 and 117, which are trying to give power to the mob in the civil court because they don't have any jurisdiction in criminal court. And now they're trying to give the police jurisdiction in civil court where they have none. Then they're bouncing from civil court to criminal court and back to civil court, which is jumping from leg to leg because they haven't got one to stand on, by way of their failure to conform with the extant laws of the land. Whoever legislated for that broke the laws. Whoever legislated for 115 and 117 committed treason because they betrayed the rights of the Irish person. No referendum, no vote, nothing. They started implementing these legislations without even asking the Irish people what they thought of it. Breaking what it is to be a member of a democratic society. So they're full of hypocrites, and all they're about doing now is hammering out anything that would be opposed to their current societal agenda, which is social conditioning of the peoples to get them to believe they cannot oppose them in any way or they'll be penalised. Just like what Tesco are doing now at the moment. If you don't have the club card, you're monetarily penalised. You have to pay twice, 3 times the amount for the item. But why? Well, you don't have the plastic. Well, what's the plastic adding in terms of value? Nothing. Okay, well that's unreasonable then. And it breaks statutory regulations in place to ensure reasonableness in business and true value being represented by an item on the shelf. So what's really happening there? They're trying to twist your arm behind your back, saying that if you don't join the club, the narrative, the rhetoric, the mob, the pride march, now we're going to penalise you. The club is a clever use of words. The Tesco club card used to be a loyalty card. It used to be descriptive of something or representative of accumulated points on the basis of return trade and return business. But you can go in and get a club card now in Tesco and straight away see all of those advantages, which are far higher than anything that used to be historically availed of by returning to the same business and accumulating those points. I remember my mother would go into a shop, I think it was Superquinn at the time, and it would take her months and months of shopping there. And I mean, there was 5 children, and we were big eaters. She would have to go in there, and she would have to be there for months before she'd be able to afford something like a hairdryer. Now you go in there, you pick up your club card, and you're going to afford something at a third of the price. That's not truthfulness in business. That's actually a penalisation or a penalty imposed if you don't have the card. It's not an advantage for having it, it's a penalty if you don't. That's a completely different kettle of fish. Because if I can get a punnet of oranges for 49 cents prior to the introduction of the card, and then after the introduction of the card, the same punnet of oranges is only 49 cents with the card, or €1.09 without it, now you're penalising me for not having the card. Because the price prior to the introduction of the card, or the addition of the card, was 49 cents. So you're actually penalising me for not having the card. Nobody's availing from having it. By the way, if everybody gets the club card, who then thereafter is benefiting from it? If everybody has it. Now they call the shots. Because you have to have the club card, you have to conform to this, and we'll tell you what the price is thereafter. What's the point in having the club card if everybody has it? There's no exclusivity. You see, it's a penalty for not having it that you're now seeing. And it's the same thing they're trying to make pervasive across every sector of society and on every front of society and every face of society. If you don't conform to what we say, we're going to penalise you. And it's the devil preparing you for the mark of the beast. If you don't take the mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy and sell, the Bible says. And this is hell trying to prepare you for it. They're now funneling you into a one-world government system that will call the shots and dictate to you while they pretend it's actually advantageous to you. One might walk in and say, whoa, a third of the price if I have the card? Well, it would be folly not to get it. No, it's folly to get it because you lose rights by so doing. You're now taking the hand of the criminal and saying, yes, be criminal towards us. Create subdivisions and discriminate against those who don't have your card. Even though one who might not have your card might have been a return customer in your business, in your shop, in your supermarket for 10 years. But because they don't have the card, they're paying 3 times the price of somebody who's just walked through the door and downloaded the app. How is this of any benefit to anybody? It's criminal conduct in business. We're seeing criminal conduct in the courts, where they're telling guards they have jurisdiction in civil matters, where they're trying to bring late appeals to the Court of Appeal, where they're trying to have civil appeals of criminal matters. A civil appeal of a criminal matter. She might as well be walking around the place like a headless chicken, if that's the sort of leadership you have. Civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction never blend. Never blend. They simply don't have any crossover. And if they're purporting that they do, they're breaking the laws and committing high treason, lying to the public. This is a very serious thing that's going on in the Court of Appeal in Ireland. They're committing high treason up there, blaming a legislator for it. They're trying to pin it at his door. They haven't named who it was. The unnamed scapegoat. Who brought this legislation into place that tells a guard he can act as judge, jury, executioner on the side of the street, summon somebody to a civil court where he's no jurisdiction, and then prosecute him as a way of picking and choosing who he's going to represent, even though he wasn't there to accumulate himself any of the evidence? You wouldn't get away with that in a criminal jurisdiction, let alone a civil jurisdiction. All of this criminality, all of this corruption is now taking place in this state. And they're telling you, diversity, tolerance. What they're telling you is, you can do whatever you want so long as it's what we say. That's what they're telling you. It's how those cults start out. You come here, it's a free place, commune, you can do whatever you want. But now you must do this, 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 and this. You like the commune, don't you? You like the benefits. Oh, good. Well, then you have to start doing this, and slowly but surely they start telling you what you have to do, even though your reason for joining was because you had an idea that there would be freedom there. There's no freedom there, and that's why they tell you. Now you have to start doing what we tell you, because it's for your benefit. And then that brainwashing, hypnotic tone comes out. You have to start doing what we tell you. And there's built into how they're speaking a sort of a warning tone in their voice. By way of inflection, they're now giving you an apprehension of that harm might come your way if you don't comply with them. So, do you see the hypocrisy? Do whatever you want, but it must be what we tell you. Join the club and you'll benefit, even though you're not benefiting, because what we're now telling you you get as a benefit for joining the club was already in place before we added the club card. So actually we're penalising you for having the club card. What else? Oh, jurisdiction in criminal matters, due process of law, everybody held equal before the law. That matters when you're in a criminal court, but when we're in a civil court we do whatever we want, and then we bring guards who have no jurisdiction in there and they do whatever they want according to what we've told them to do, to ensure our rhetoric and our agenda and our narrative is upheld, and those who oppose it and would expose it don't get a voice. Excellent. High treason to the nth degree. And how do they purport that they're able to do this? A legislature that doesn't require anybody to vote on it. And then when you bring it before the High Court, what do? They say, yeah, we should test that. Yeah. And then midway through the case, they abandon testing it. They don't tell anybody. In terms of the public, in terms of the one being accused. Don't tell us until the conclusion of the judge, which is totally wayward and corrupt, is on courts.ie. Then they tell you. And what did the conclusion say? It remains an open question as to whether Section 115 or 117 are constitutional, and certainly for an appropriate case. What? There's a more appropriate case. When do you think this will come around? Isn't the most appropriate case the one that has convictions that have come into being by way of these legislations that we're supposed to be testing the constitutionality of? Wouldn't that be the most pressing case? Yes, and that's why it found its way into the schedule. But then they just say it remains an open question for an appropriate case. We're not saying we won't do it, we just haven't. Oh, you just haven't. But a man's freedom depends on it, and you're supposed to prioritise reinstating a person to their full spectrum of rights. You're actually to prioritise that, so you have to presume them innocent. Why do we prioritise that? Because people lie. People lie about other people. So even a guard might lie about you if he doesn't like what you're saying. If he has a different worldview than you, if he has a different interest or set of moral values than you, he might lie about you. So how do we ensure that his lies don't result in your criminalization? We can't make a conclusive ruling, based on that evidence alone, based on what somebody says alone. We have to have solid, irrefutable evidence. What has not been produced at any stage in the court of law regarding this case, Tallon versus the DPP? Solid, irrefutable evidence. Not a jot of it. Oh, we don't require it to convict somebody of a criminal offence? No, apparently not. But we do. Well, the judge didn't conform to that. Oh, and do you know what else they didn't do? Give any reason for their ruling. Why? But they have to. They're lawfully obligated to. Well, they just didn't. A judge is lawfully obligated to pin his ruling to the appropriate and relevant law. Otherwise, a judge could say anything he wanted to say and wouldn't have to tell you why he said it. But judges have to hold themselves accountable to the law. Thereby, and therefore, they have to tell you why they've come to a conclusion. Failing to do so is failing to complete their office. They can't close the day's work. So they say, well, the court finds that. Okay, so obviously the court, we're talking about the people in the court. When we say the court, we're talking about the court administration, the judge, if there's a jury, whoever's involved in that decision-making process. It's not just the building. So the court finds why. Next case. But why? Why did you come to this conclusion? Where's the solid, irrefutable evidence? What are guards doing in civil court? The legislation says they can. Which legislation? The legislation that undoes basically all of the precepts of law in a criminal jurisdiction. Yes, but it's not in a criminal jurisdiction. We're in a civil jurisdiction. Oh, but you shouldn't be in a civil jurisdiction, and most certainly what you can't do in a criminal jurisdiction, you can't then do in a civil jurisdiction where you've no jurisdiction. Oh yeah. Well, who's this legislator that said you did have jurisdiction in civil matters? Are they a guard? No. Are they a lawyer? No. Are they accomplished in the law and versed in it? No. It's a politician. Oh. Was there a vote? No. But it wouldn't matter even if there was a vote, because you can't undo presumption of innocence, impartiality and jurisdiction and everybody being held equal before the law. You can't give a cease and desist order unless it's gone through due process of law. You can't arrest somebody unless they've broken the law. You can't summons them unless you're summoning them because you suspect they broke the law. And a guard most certainly can't summon somebody to a civil court. Hey, but they did all those things. Why? Nobody knows. And then when we went to the Court of Appeal, when we went to the High Court, they said, we'll test the constitutionality of that section. That's very questionable. For good reason, we'll test it. Well, you should, because there's a circuit court appeal has been adjourned on the basis that you are testing the constitutionality of those specific sections. A circuit court appeal depends on that. Oh, then we must. But they didn't. It remains an open question as to whether section 115 and 117 are constitutional or not. But don't all your convictions are quashed. Oh, but a month and 4 days late, when you think you're in the clear, because it's absolutely unthinkable that appeal would be accepted a month and 4 days late, then we'll lodge the appeal. Well, did you apply for an extension to appeal? No. But don't you have to? Yeah. But you didn't? No. Why? Don't we have laws in this country? Oh, I see. So now the Court of Appeal have accepted. Let's get this right. Now the Court of Appeal have accepted a late appeal, claiming that the appeal requires a civil case, so it's a civil appeal. How can you civil appeal on a criminal matter? A civil appeal on criminal convictions. That's two different courts. Yeah. Well, you can't have criminal convictions in both the civil court and criminal court. No, that's preposterous. You can't have criminal convictions in a civil court. And then how can you appeal criminal convictions in a civil court? How can it be a civil appeal? Can't. Why are you doing that? Hi. Hi. You still here? So, guards dragged you into a civil court even though a superintendent of An Garda Síochána dragged you into a civil court even though he wasn't previously exposed to any of the evidence, didn't accumulate or gather any of it himself, dragged you into a civil court, then chose who he was going to prosecute, foregoing partiality, presumption of innocence. Didn't have anything personally to do with any of the evidence, didn't accumulate any of it himself, wasn't there to see anything, hear anything, nothing to do with it. Dragged you into civil court outside of his jurisdiction. He was gunning for you. Yeah. But he's not allowed to do that. No. But some politician said he could. Oh. Is that how our system works? Not at all. Oh. Why doesn't it work that way? Because the public have a right to reject it. How can they do that if they just legislate for it and then nobody really knows that it's happened except those who are sort of in the know? Oh yeah. Go figure. So you can't just legislate for anything you want to? No. Sure, how could you run a country that way? You can't just legislate something that totally contradicts existing laws. That's preposterous. You've got to conform to the law, the Constitution, our rights, the precepts of Western law and order that have existed for very good reason for thousands of years. Suddenly a politician, legislator thinks that he knows better. But for all of the aforementioned reasons, he doesn't. Because a guard has to assume you're innocent. He can only give evidence that he himself has accumulated. He can only be involved in a case that he himself initiated. He can't be involved in a civil court. He can't summons anybody to a civil court. He can't give a cease and desist. He can't play judge, jury and executioner on the side of the street. If you haven't committed a crime that he can't arrest you for, what's he doing summoning you to a civil court? That's ridiculous. Yeah. Why are they doing it? So if they've no jurisdiction in a civil court, everything that they did and everything that resulted of what they did ultimately falls to the ground because it has no foundation. How can somebody be criminalized as a result of hearsay? They can't. Or prima facie evidence alone? No. Give us an example of what the guards used as evidence against you. This man was singing a song about Jesus in the public square. Oh, give us a bit more. This man was reading from the Holy Bible. He read Leviticus 18:22. A man shall not lie with a man as with a woman. And when I asked him what he said, he even repeated it to me. Well, aren't you even repeating it in the court, guard? Yes. So if you arrested a man for streaking across Lansdowne Road, would you then streak across Lansdowne Road to show the judge what he did? Why is it illegal for me to repeat Leviticus 18:22 or considered evidence against me, but you're allowed to repeat it in the court? Antisocial behavior. And now the Court of Appeal is proposing on the basis of a late appeal, a month and 4 days late, no extension for an appeal applied for, no application for an extension to appeal. The High Court, the Court of Appeal says, yes, we'll accept a civil appeal for a criminal matter. A month and 4 days late, not a problem. By the way, this is an unopposed appeal. You can't represent yourself, Mr. Talbot, okay? Why? But why? I dismissed my counsel. They declared that to the court, but the court still kept trying to communicate to the dismissed counsel. And then because they couldn't communicate with me directly, they communicated to my sister. Even though they were dismissed. Did the court try and contact me? No. But they have my contact details. Yeah. So they didn't try email or phone or... No. They went to your dismissed counsel. Oh. And then dismissed counsel gave partial information. But you can't hold them accountable for that. You dismissed them. These people still getting paid? Yeah. Big money. What's law? So a civil appeal on a criminal matter? Would they say, well, initially it was in a civil court, yeah. They're the issues we're addressing. Oh, so the quashed convictions aren't going to be discussed today, is it? Surely a civil appeal this far on is totally inappropriate, being that every other case and every other hearing was held in a criminal jurisdiction. Circuit court, criminal circuit court. Because you can't actually rule upon crimes or convict anybody in a civil court. You can't charge anybody in a civil court. It must be in a criminal jurisdiction. So then these criminal convictions came about and now they want to appeal civilly in a civil jurisdiction? Yeah. Now, IREC want to get involved. International Human Rights and Equality Commission. Or is it Irish? Irish. Doesn't matter. So the point is, they want to get involved and aid the court. But this is, hang on. They want to get involved in a court that has no jurisdiction because they're trying to deal with criminal matters in a civil remit. So they haven't established jurisdiction to discuss the subject matter they brought before the civil court? Correct.